All right, Warren Buffett released his 2010 tax form to back up why successful Americans should be taxed more. But look at this gigantic difference between adjusted gross income versus taxable income. His adjusted gross income, $63 million, but his taxable income, $39 million. You do the math, there's a $24 million gap between the two. That is incredible. Now, he paid $7 million, which comes out to 17.4%, but how does he dodge paying taxes on another $24 million? And there's more to this story. But his enormous wealth is not taxed. The realized successful earners pay something like 30%. That is regular successful earners. Mr. Buffett has unrealized capital gains. I don't really get this. Let's talk. CNBC contributor Howard Dean. He's former Vermont governor and former DNC chairman. And we welcome Congressman Tim Huelskamp, Republican from Kansas, who called upon billionaire Buffett to release the content. And he sent you a letter, Mr. Huelskamp. And were you as struck by the gaps in this information as I am?
Well, I really was, and trying to figure out how a guy sheltered, $20-some million of income from taxes. That's something that pretty well demonstrates that, he doesn't trust Washington with his money either. He doesn't want to pay taxes. He wants other people to pay taxes.
I mean, either he's building in humongous capital gains and dividends, or maybe interest income, or maybe charitable deductions, but he's exploiting the tax code as bad as anyone I've ever seen. And I don't know why we should use his anecdotal experience to make all American taxpayers pay more. That's the part I don't get.
Well, show us the proof, Mr. Buffett. If we're going to name a brand new tax law after Warren Buffett, show us what the proof is. From your anecdotes, that's not enough, and I'm glad he released some of this information. It's starting to show exactly what the real problem is he didn't want to pay taxes. He wants other folks to do that. I believe he probably didn't send in an extra $1 to Washington, D.C. because he doesn't trust them. He wants to give it to charity, and God bless him, because he knows they'll spend it better than Barack Obama will in Washington, D.C.
Howard Dean, do you dodge taxes as much as Warren Buffett? Is your difference between gross income and taxable income 40-45% the way Buffett is?
I would have to say my gross income doesn't even misses this one by several zeros. Look, the fact is that Warren Buffett is making exactly the point that he's made publicly many, many times. Of course he doesn't pay any taxes, more taxes than he absolutely has to, and everybody else in America is doing the same thing. It's just that when you make the kind of money he does, probably you ought to be paying more taxes. He has made the point many times that he, on a percentage basis, pays less tax than his secretary. That is why all those kids are out on Wall Street saying down with Wall Street. The problem is people begin to believe now that the system doesn't work for them, and when you believe the system doesn't work for you, then America's in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, but I just say, Tim, the thing is, when you look at the loopholes that Buffett is exploiting, doesn't this argue for full-fledged tax reform? Not to raise tax rates, not to penalize upper-end earners who pay income. They're not like Warren Buffett. He has all his money in unrealized capital gains, and he dodges taxes through charitable deductions. Doesn't this cry out for reform? Isn't that the bottom line here, rather than higher tax rates?
Absolutely. We don't need higher taxes. We need more taxpayers. We have 50% of Americans paying absolutely no federal income taxes, and the House Republicans, we passed proposals to reform the tax code, and that will make the tax code flatter, fairer, and more simple, and I think that's what more Americans, that's what they want to see out of Washington.
No, they certainly don't. What the congressman is saying, that instead of raising taxes on people who are making millions, we ought to raise taxes on middle-class people who are already in big trouble. That's the most ridiculous proposal I've ever heard.
What I'm saying, Mr. Dean, is we spend too much money in Washington. That's a distraction by this president and his biggest supporter, Mr. Buffett. This is not about taxes. We could raise taxes like Mr. Buffett wants. It would only raise enough money to sustain Washington for 2 days. It's not about the taxes. It's about the spending. And this president and the left has spent way too much money. That's why we have $1.3 trillion deficit.
And I think
we have $1.3 trillion deficit because George Bush cut taxes 10 years ago and never paid for it. Those tax cuts were not paid for because he didn't have the courage to make the cuts.
You forget it was President Obama that extended the tax cuts. It was President Obama that extended the so-called Bush tax cuts.
That's because the Republicans would not give money to people who were unemployed, and that was the price we had to pay for it. People have lost faith in the Republicans in Congress, and I can understand why.
We're getting very partisan. Governor Howard Dean, thank you.
Getting very partisan.
Congressman Tim Huelskamp, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Buffett, you got a lot of loopholes everybody should be looking at. Coming up.